Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Yakaraj here. Welcome to a little video I just wanted to make just to explain my work to somebody, just because I really wanted to. Um, just part of being an artist, you know. Um, but and also I apologize. Periodically, you may hear a weird high pitched noise in the background. I actually have no idea what it is, but yeah, something going off periodically. Um, but there's a lot of interwoven patterns and such in the different picture placements and stuff that I wanted to explain and go over. A lot of it was my idea, but some of it just happened to fall into place accidentally, quote unquote, which gives me the idea that I had a little help from somebody else, if you know what I mean. But anyway, for starters, each of these columns has a pattern. That is, each of the characters within each column is connected in some way, shape, or form. Excuse me, I got a hiccup. But anyway, this first column here, for instance, it would be what I would call the help or the information column. You start off with the steward Smethels, who is, the very first character you actually interact with. Now, I mean, technically, the beginning of the game is the prologue, and the only character you interact with but don't ever see is your landlady, and she talks to you, but that's it. You don't talk back or anything, or you don't see her. You only hear her. But as far as interactable characters are concerned, and as far as the characters are on the ship, Smethels is the very first character you interact with. And he gives you basic information such as how to move, clicking, and what screen indicators mean and whatnot. And also gives you somewhat irrelevant information such as like changing your settings and stuff to optimize your experience. So he breaks the fourth wall in that respect. But he also tells you for further information to talk to these three gentlemen right here, such as if you want to find a certain person or place, he tells you to consult these two people right here. The lift attendant will give you directions on where to go, and then the purser can tell you what cabin somebody is in because he has the passenger list. And then if you ask him you want more information on a certain item in your inventory, he tells you to talk to Leyland Trask the Seer, who will give you readings on your inventory items. So yeah, that's the help / information column right there. Good starter ones and stuff. Leyland Trask in particular becomes very pivotal to the story as it progresses. Smethels does too, to some regard, but he's mostly important at the beginning. Once you got everything down, he's kind of more a side character, although he is, I would say, the most important side character, we'll say. And onto the second column. The second column is kind of more the hot gossip column, if you will. It has some similarities to the help information column, but it's not quite the same. These two characters you'll randomly run into. I say randomly because where you run into them is kind of random, but when you run into them is not really random because they'll only appear after you've accomplished certain things. And your first and third encounter with them, they'll talk to you about Eric Burns here, the photographer, and they'll tell you where he lives, or what cabin he's in, rather. And they'll also give you some slight info on Colonel Zeitel and Sasha Barbican. Meanwhile, and also they'll talk about this fellow named Isidore Strauss and where he was on the ship. And that becomes a little important later on. And actually becomes important in finding a certain item. and it's also connected to the purser in that regard. And then Eric Burns, the photographer, has different photographs of Andrew Conkling and Lord Charles Lambeth, and Sacha Barbican and Colonel Zeidel, and also of Haderlitz or Willy von Haderlitz and Clarice Limehouse. He's also got some pictures of what are probably the Carters, which are a rich couple aboard the Titanic that have a motor car in the cargo hold. And Daisy Cashmore, this lady, also tells you about the Carters, and also tells you where they keep the keys, which is in the purser's office. And she also gives you kind of more a clue in on how to use the purser, because she asks you to go find decipher the initials of a certain passenger, and you can use those initials and ask the purser, and he'll tell you. And so there's that. There's the hot gossip column, if you will, all about all the different people in Grandeur and stuff like that. This third column here is what I would call the Conkling affair column. You got Andrew Conkling here, and then his wife Beatrix Conkling. And then you got Shayla Hacker down here, who is the runaway parlor maid of theirs. And the reason she ran away is because they are unable to have children because Beatrix is infertile. And so they used Shayla to get one. And she was like naive or something and didn't suspect that they were doing it so that Beatrix could steal her baby and make it her own. So once she found that out, then she ran away with her baby and also took with her this letter that was addressed to Conkling. And what it entailed was information on there being bad steel, that is, steel with a high sulfur content that was put in the Titanic, because Conkling here is the chairman of Conkling Steel, which produces steel for ships, one of which being the Titanic itself. So that's, not good, so that's why they want that letter back. But the person literally standing in between them and her, or rather between her and them, is her brother, Jack Hacker, who, demands a ransom, or, if you will, demands $5,000 to give her in exchange for the letter. And then later on and during the sinking sequence, Beatrix Conkling manages to steal Shayla's baby, and then Jack Hacker here, more likely than not, is going to have an item that you really need in order to win the game. So he tells you to go to Beatrix Conkling, give her the letter so that she gives the baby back, and then give it back to Shayla, and in doing that, he'll give you the item that you need, which is the painting. With hidden German plans on the back. Excuse me. So that's the whole Conkling affair column. This fourth column, or middle column, is basically the crew. I guess you could say these are also kind of crew, but these are more staff than they are crew. This is just straight crew right here. You got the boiler room worker, you got the engine room guy, the cargo hold guy, and then this guy who you first are introduced to him on the boat deck, and he's the one preventing you from going into the bridge. But he also gives you the clue that, or tells you that Officer Morrow has misplaced his binoculars. But then later on, you see him on A deck attempting to fix some electrical problems. So in that sense, he's the electrician of the four. So yeah, that's the crew. This fifth column here is what I would call the Lambeth Black Hand column. So you got Lady and Lord Lambeth, Georgia and Charles. And then you got Sasha Barbican, who is a friend of theirs, but Georgia ended up having an affair with Sasha because she's like not happy with Charles or something. Because Charles starts drinking because he's indebted to Andrew Conkling, but then Sasha Barbican also has another friend who is a stowaway named Vlad Demonic, who is part of the Black Hand. And Sasha himself also has some affiliation with the Black Hand. So Charles's revenge on Sasha and Georgia is using that knowledge of Sasha's affiliation with the Black Hand as leverage against him to force him to help him put Georgia away so he can start a new life without her. So yeah, that's the whole Lambeth Black Hand affair. This sixth column is quite simply the Haderlitz column. You got Clarice Limehouse here, who is the girlfriend of Willy von Haderlitz, the name of the column right there. And then Willy von Haderlitz is the associate of Colonel Zeitel. And then all three of these characters are known by this fellow, Max Seidelman, who the earliest you can actually interact with these characters and talk to them, namely these two right here, is through Max Seidelman. Now, you first hear of these, and you can at first interact with Zeitel, but he won't talk to you. But the first time you can actually talk to Zeitel early on would be through Max Seidelman here. And then Max Seidelman also is trying to hit on Clarice Limehouse every so often. And other than this gentleman right here, these three characters are the ones that Max Seidelman is like pretty much always talking about. And also, on D-Deck, for a limited period of time, you'll see these two characters together in the D-Deck reception. So there is that connection as well. Then this final and seventh column is what I would kind of refer to as the endgame column, in that each of these characters become crucial in their own regard during the endgame or the sinking sequence. So just as Smethels is the first character you interact with on the ship on April 14th, Penny is the first character you interact with at the beginning of the sinking sequence, which is April 15th. So yeah, there's that connection between the two, which I didn't notice until a previous recording attempt, and I was like, oh, look at that, they're on the two top corners, the first people you interact with on the two separate days on the Titanic. Which, speaking of which, all four of these characters on the corners are like arguably the most pivotal characters in the entire game, or the most important characters to interact with in the entire game. Zeitel is also important, but as far as like the most important characters to interact with, it would be these four, I would argue. And then also when she first talks to you, when the ship is sinking, Penny Pringle that is, she'll give you some clues on where to find the remaining items, such as checking with Zeitel and Vlad. And she'll also give you any items that you gave to the purser to save, basically. Then there's Reverend Edgar Trout here, who you could go through the entire game without talking to him, like even during the sinking sequence. However, it may be in your best interest to find and talk to him during the sinking sequence, because if he'll ask you a couple of theological questions, and if you answer them correctly, then he'll give you clues on how to find any remaining items that you have left to find. Sorry, that was kind of redundant. Such as, if you answered the first one correctly, he'll give you the lead to go talk to Clarice Limehouse in the first class lounge. If you get the second one correct, then he'll tell you about the hackers on the second class stairwell. Which the Gorse Joneses here will also give you that lead about the hackers on the first class lounge. In fact, if you run into them during the sinking sequence, and if Jack has the painting, then they'll tell you he has the painting. So, that's very convenient running into them. However, you'll only run into them during a certain or in a certain area and within a certain period of time. So there's that as well. Further side note, that is, these characters are also another way you can leave the ship. But, as I mentioned before, they will appear at the beginning of the sinking sequence, and I think during phases 2 through 3, maybe even 4. And if you have everything, they'll offer, or whether or not actually, if you have or do not have everything, they'll offer you a seat in their lifeboat, and you have only that chance. Either say yes or no. And either way, if you say yes or no, then that's the last time you'll ever interact with them. But if you say yes, whether you're ready or not, the game will end. So there's that little side note. But yeah, that's Reverend Edgar Trout there. Then there's Buick Riviera right here, which this guy is always sitting in the smoking room, and he basically serves as just a mini game throughout the entire game. Like, you can just play blackjack within the game. So a game within a game. So that's where he's kind of just a little side entertainment sort of character up until the endgame phase. Then he ends up being important. And why he ends up becoming important, I'll explain later. I will say this. So there are 4 different items you need to collect throughout the game. There's the painting, as I mentioned. There is also Haderlitz's notebook. And then there's the Rubaiyat, which is a book that this guy's after. And then there is the Lambeth diamond necklace, which is what Vlad is after. Well, actually, is after either of those two. You just need to you actually don't need to leave the ship with the Rubaiyat and the diamond necklace. You just need to make sure Vlad doesn't leave the ship without them. So there's that. And what I mean by you don't have to actually leave the ship, you can use those in a bet while playing against Riviera. And what he is using in the bet is this boat pass. And the boat pass basically resembles a tarot card, number 13. There's like a lot more, or death or something like that, which you can use as a cheatsy way of leaving the ship by showing it to either of these 2 gentlemen. Now, you could use that on yourself, or you could give it to somebody else. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. And giving it to somebody else is where it becomes critical in leaving the ship, winning the game. Sequence, you have Officer Morrow here, who is the last of the 4 chief characters, I guess you could say. And during the sinking sequence, if you talk to him early on, he'll be like, it's women and children first, you can't get on the lifeboat. But then you ask him, well, what can I do to help? Then he says, help the passengers, keep them calm. Last thing we need is a riot. And if you do that, and if you come back to him during the last phase of the sinking while they're still lifeboats, then he'll let you aboard the lifeboat saying, I see you've done your best to help. We have space for one more. Get in. So that's like the most honorable way of leaving the ship. So there's the most honorable way, which is via Officer Morrow. There's the most dishonorable way, which is via the boat pass from Riviera, or there's the middle ground, which is with these two right here. So each of the people in each column have something to do with each other. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. So there is also some slight connection between these two right here, which is that not only do you learn from the purser that Edgar or Reverend Trout here, his cabin is right next to Penny's, but on top of that, like, you know, when you're going down to meet Penny on the second class stairwell, he's right here, and he's like, oh, calling on Miss Pringle, and it seems kind of hinted that he's sort of crushing on Penny just a little bit, which, you know, his wife did just die, so there is that, you know, that tendency. And then he is also somewhat connected to Riviera as well, because he's constantly damning Willie Haterless here for gambling, and of course this guy is like the chief gambler aboard the ship, so there's that as well. Which, speaking of which, and then this guy is connected to Officer Morrow, because Officer Morrow talks about him and how the crew is afraid of Riviera, and stuff like that and whatnot, which is part of why when you show them the boat pass, they're suddenly scared and they're like, yeah, you can get on the lifeboat, which, as a side note, I mean, they're already doomed anyway with the ship sinking, so showing them the boat pass that actually gets them even more scared is like, I wonder, you know, that's interesting. So there's that as well, the connection between the two. And like, another pattern involved is the bottommost character of each column is connected to the top character in the next column. So Trask is related to Ribena Gorse Jones here, because he ends up telling her to tell you that he wants to meet you, quote unquote, where honor and glory crown time, and which is of course like the clock on the grand staircase. So that's that connection right there. Daisy Cashmore is connected to Andrew Conkling because if you interact with her, she is the one that tells you that Andrew Conkling is looking for you. And so that's how you first get involved in this entire Conkling affair, is via Daisy Cashmore. Shayla Hacker and this Boiler fellow are, like, the connection is not obvious, but in the boiler rooms, when you talk to this guy, you end up getting into a flitting match, or insult match, and if you win, then he'll tell you that at the end of his shift, he's going to go see Shayla Hacker, because she's the prettiest lass on board, as he says, and even tells her what cabin she's in. You can find out what cabin she's in via Andrew Conkling or through the purser, but that's another person who will tell you. And depending on who you talk to first, he could be very well the very first one who tells you what cabin she's in. And then this sailor and Georgia, their connection is also not obvious, but as I mentioned before, this guy is also seen on A deck trying to fix wiring, and the little nook that he's in fixing the wiring is right near Sasha's cabin. And during the sinking sequence, Georgia is in Sasha's cabin, so there's that connection there. And then Vlad and Clarice here. The connection, as I mentioned before, during the sinking sequence, if you answer the first one correctly, he gives you the lead to go talk to Clarice in the first class lounge, and if you do that, then Clarice gives you her shawl. And if Vlad still has an item that you need in order to win or get the good ending, then you give him that shawl that he will use as a disguise as a woman, or to disguise himself as a woman. And then he'll give you an item that you need in return. You can alternatively just give him the shawl as a pure mercy move on Carlson's part, your character. So that would be a cool alternate timeline development route, if you will. So there's that connection there as well. And then the connection between Max Seidelman and Penny Pringle is not that obvious either, but during the time when Willie is killed or is at least threatened, Penny tells you to go talk to people who know him, which of course would involve this guy. And then after you talk to Clarice Limehouse and give her the ring, or Willie's ring, then if you talk to Max Seidelman immediately after that, then he'll tell you that some English tomato was looking for you, said her name was Pringle, said it was important. And so there's that subtle, very loose connection there, but a connection nonetheless. And then even this one in Morrow and Smeddles, even that one, it loops back around. Not only do you see these two characters at the Turkish bath when Willie is killed, but Smeddles, as I mentioned before, is basically the beginning of the game, and then Morrow basically represents the end of the game. So you got the beginning and the end on opposite corners. So yeah, there's that as well. And then the last real notable connections, let's see, as I mentioned before, this guy is always denouncing gambling as a sin, which is why he's stalking and condemning Willie Haderlitz here. So there's that connection, and also that connection. And then interestingly, this was another quote-unquote accidental thing, but these two characters, so there are two characters who die in the plot that whose fate you can't change. Conkling can die if you talk to him during the sinking sequence, but if you don't talk to him, then he'll just go down with the ship. But you can kill him off prematurely that way. But as far as the two characters that will die no matter what, there's Haderlitz and then there's Sasha Barbican. And interestingly enough, the person who kills them is right below them. Because he kills Willie and then Vlad kills Sasha. And then as far as the rows are concerned, there isn't really any connection in any of them, except for this one. And this is where I'll get back to Buick Riviera, as I promised. So this row right here is what I would call the painting row. And so it starts with the purser, because Penny, when she tells you that the painting is what Zeidel is really after, she tells you to sneak a peek at the purser's cargo manifest. And then if you look in that, then it tells you, the name that's on the crate that has the painting, and it has Sasha's signature. And that exact name on the crate is, of course, what is seen on a photograph that Eric Burns takes of Sasha. It's a picture of Sasha holding that crate. And of course, so you're like, okay, so that's what the painting crate looks like. And then Jack Hacker, as I mentioned, has the painting in the sinking sequence. And basically, if you don't get the painting, which it's kind of difficult to get the painting before Haderlitz does. But if you do manage to get the painting before Haderlitz does, then you'll have the painting from then on out. But if you don't, then the only way to get the painting is through Jack Hacker, because Haderlitz gives it to Jack Hacker. So basically in the game, either you have the painting or Jack has the painting. That's basically it. except later on, and I'll get during the sinking sequence, and I'll get to that. And then, of course, there's the seaman right here who is guarding the cargo hold, which is, of course, where the painting is. And if Haderlitz grabs it before you do, then he'll tell you that Haderlitz did. He won't say it's Haderlitz, but he will say a young German, which is, of course, what Haderlitz is. And then there's Barbican, of course, which is who the painting belongs to, and he's giving it to Zeidel, and Zeidel is giving the Rubaiyat to Sasha as exchange. And during the sinking sequence, if you Zeidel ends up poisoning Lady Georgia, who, as it turns out, is rather an old flame of our characters. And the reason he does that is to basically force you to give him the painting so that he will give you the antidote to save Georgia. So then you're kind of faced with this catch-22 of, well, what do? Do I complete my mission, get the good ending, or do I save Georgia? And you feel like you have to choose between the two, and it definitely seems that way. However, that is where this guy comes in, as I mentioned. As I mentioned before, he'll give you the boat pass if you win a game with using either the Rubaiyat and or the diamond necklace as bets. And if you get the boat pass, as I said, you could either use it and show it to these two gentlemen and get off the boat, or get off the ship that way, or you can give it to Zeidel and get the painting back from him. And in fact, if you tell Penny that you had to give the painting to Zeidel, then she'll tell you, or she'll give you the clue that maybe there's something else that you could give Zeidel in exchange. And so Zeidel's like, yeah, I want the painting and all, but I'd rather stay alive. So he's like, yeah, give me the boat pass. So that's how you can get the painting back. So yeah, that's the whole painting right there. And that's also pretty interesting because it just shows that each of these columns has some relation whatsoever, or has some relation to the painting in some regard, you know. But the one that has the most connection, if you will, would be the Conkling one, and the one where the intersection point is, of course, Jack Hacker. And the reason I find that interesting is Jack is the only character in this entire game whose name is shared by another character in the movie, namely Jack Dawson, of course. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of funny. And also, Jack Hacker is the only character in the Conkling column that you actually have to interact with in the game. All these other characters you don't even have to talk to once. But Jack is the only one you do have to at some point. So yeah, that's all the connections I can really think of off the top of my head. But I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope this wasn't too boring or uninteresting to you. But I just wanted to explain that. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, God bless, and I hope to see you all next time. Ciao.